Her billionaire CEO husband humiliated her in front of visitors. She signed the divorce papers the next day. "Natasha, why don't you tell everyone what you did before we met?" The question landed in the center of the crystal-adorned dining table like a grenade with a pin already pulled. 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her. 40 forks suspended mid-air. 40 conversations dying in a single breath. Natasha Webb felt her champagne glass tremble in her grip. She looked at her husband, Cameron Drake, the man she had loved for 4 years, the man she had given up everything to build a life with, and in his smile, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. Victory. "I worked in community outreach," she managed, her voice barely audible above the sudden silence. Community outreach. Cameron's laugh cut through the room like shattered glass. That's a generous way to describe handing out flyers at a nonprofit nobody's ever heard of. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd of investors and board members seated around the table. "My wife has a talent for making poverty sound noble." Cameron's voice grew stronger, feeding off the attention. She was sweet when I met her. Simple. Uncomplicated. And at the time, that's what I needed. The word simple hung in the air like an accusation. But as I've grown, as this company has grown, I've realized something. Cameron paused for effect, his eyes scanning the faces of the 40 witnesses he had carefully assembled. Success requires a partner who matches your ambition. Someone who understands the language of power. He extended his hand toward a woman seated 3 chairs down. A woman in a crimson dress who rose with a smile that said she had been waiting for this exact moment. "Vanessa has agreed to stand beside me, not just in business, but in life." The gasps were immediate. The whispers exploded across the table like wildfire. Cameron reached into his jacket and produced a leather folder. "I've filed for divorce, and tonight, in front of all of you, I'm asking Natasha to sign these papers, to let us both move forward into the lives we're meant to live." He walked around the table with measured steps and placed the documents directly in front of his wife. "Sign them. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Enough money to go back to whatever simple life you came from." 40 people watched. 40 people who could have spoken up, who could have stopped this public execution. Not one of them moved. Natasha looked at the papers, at the man she had loved, at the woman in crimson who was already claiming her place, at 40 witnesses who had chosen power over decency. And something inside her that had been silent for 4 years finally woke up. "Do you have a pen? Have you ever been destroyed by the person who promised to love you most? Have you ever stood in a room full of people and felt completely invisible? Have you ever hidden your true worth to find real love, only to discover the person you married could never love anything he couldn't control?" This is the story of a woman who walked away from a billion-dollar empire to discover if authentic love existed. A woman who found a man who would humiliate her in front of 40 witnesses. A woman who signed divorce papers without reading a single word. And a family who would arrive 24 hours later to remind her husband exactly who he had just discarded. Stay with me, because what Cameron Drake didn't know, what none of those 40 people could have possibly guessed, was that the woman he had just publicly destroyed was worth more than everyone in that room combined. And her family was about to make sure he never forgot it. But to understand the magnitude of what happened that night, we need to go back to the beginning. To the moment when Natasha Webb made the decision that would change everything. 5 years earlier, the Webb family estate stretched across 300 acres of Connecticut coastline, private beach access, a staff of 52, gardens that had been photographed for Architectural Digest 6 times, a wine cellar worth more than most people would earn in 3 lifetimes. If America had royalty, the Webb family would wear the crown. The empire had been built over 4 generations, starting with telegraph infrastructure in the 1890s. Natasha's great-grandfather had owned the lines that carried news across the eastern seaboard. Her grandfather had expanded into radio when everyone else said it was a passing fad. Her father, Marcus Webb, had purchased struggling television networks in the 80s and transformed them into media powerhouses. By the time Natasha was born, Webb Media owned broadcast networks, cable channels, digital platforms, and satellite systems that reached 3 billion people across 6 continents. The family wasn't just wealthy, they were infrastructure. They were the pipes through which information flowed. Victoria Webb ran the empire alongside her husband with the precision of a surgeon and the instincts of a general. Silver-haired even in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, fluent in 6 languages, capable of dismantling a corporate rival before lunch and hosting a state dinner by evening. She had given Marcus 3 children, each one groomed from birth to take their place in the kingdom. Jackson Webb, the eldest at 31, ran the broadcast division. He had his father's ruthlessness and his mother's political instincts. Watching him negotiate was like watching a predator play with its food before the kill. Elliot Webb, 29, managed the digital platforms. He could predict trends 3 years before they happened, and had tripled the company's streaming revenue in 18 months. Brilliant, calculating, and absolutely loyal to family above all else. And then there was Natasha. Natasha was the youngest at 23, dark-haired like her father, with her mother's fine bone structure and a sensitivity that seemed almost out of place in a family of sharks. She painted in her spare time, spent hours in the estate gardens talking to the staff's children, cried at documentaries about climate change and animal rescues. She felt everything deeply, perhaps too deeply for a world that valued armor over authenticity. Her brothers loved her fiercely and protected her instinctively. Her parents adored her but worried constantly about how she would survive in the ruthless ecosystem they had built. And Natasha felt like she was slowly suffocating under the weight of a name she had never asked to carry. The charity gala was held at the estate on a June evening. 200 guests, politicians, business leaders, entertainment executives, old money families whose children had been circling Natasha like sharks since she turned 18. She stood on the terrace overlooking the ocean, watching the party through the French doors. The same faces she had seen at every event for 23 years. The same conversations about mergers and acquisitions and who was buying what and which senator could be influenced. A young man approached her with champagne and a smile that had been practiced in front of mirrors. Gregory Ashford, from a banking family that went back 6 generations. "Natasha, you look stunning tonight." His eyes did the calculation she had seen 1,000 times. He wasn't seeing her. He was seeing the Webb empire attached to her name. "Thank you, Gregory. I was hoping we could talk about the Hamptons this summer. Mother is hosting at the compound, and she specifically asked me to invite you." "That's very kind, but I have plans." "Plans?" He laughed, like the concept was absurd coming from her. What could possibly be more important than the Ashford summer season? Natasha looked at this man with his perfect hair and his perfect pedigree and his perfect inability to see her as anything other than a merger opportunity, and something inside her cracked. "Excuse me." She walked away without looking back, leaving Gregory standing on the terrace with his practiced smile faltering. Inside, the party continued. The orchestra played. The champagne flowed. Conversations buzzed with the energy of people who believed they mattered because they knew other people who mattered. Natasha found her mother in the library, standing by the window with a glass of red wine, watching the party with an expression of detached observation. "Running away, darling." Victoria didn't turn around. "Suffocating." Victoria nodded slowly, as if this was a conversation she had been expecting for years. "I remember that feeling." Natasha moved to stand beside her mother. "When did it stop?" "When I found purpose beyond the performance." Victoria turned to look at her daughter with those sharp, knowing eyes. "But you're not looking for purpose, are you? You're looking to discover if anyone could love you for yourself." The words hit Natasha like a physical impact. "Yes, that's exactly it." "Then perhaps you should go find out." Natasha stared at her mother. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you've spent your entire life in a cage made of gold and silk and expectations. Perhaps it's time to see what you can build without it." "You're telling me to leave." "I'm telling you that you have my permission to discover who Natasha is when no one knows her last name." Victoria's voice was gentle but absolutely firm. "Take 5 years. Change your name. Live anonymously. Find out if real love exists outside these walls. But the family, the business, the expectations. Your brothers can manage the empire. They were born for it." Victoria reached out and took her daughter's hand. "You were born for something different. I've always known that. I think you have too. And you would just let me go." Natasha felt tears burning behind her eyes. "I built this empire so my children could have choices, not chains." Victoria squeezed her daughter's hand. "If you ever need me, if you're ever in trouble, if you ever want to come home, I will move heaven and earth to reach you. But until then, you will have the freedom to fail, to struggle, to grow, to love without the weight of 4 generations on your shoulders." "What about father?" "Your father will argue. He'll say you're being reckless and naive and throwing away your future." Victoria smiled slightly. "And I will handle him. That's what I do." 3 weeks later, Natasha Webb stood in a 4th-floor walk-up apartment in Queens, looking at a space that was smaller than her childhood bedroom's closet. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that consisted of a hot plate and a refrigerator that hummed like it was dying. Windows that looked out onto a fire escape and a brick wall. No staff, no driver, no family name to open doors. The landlord, a 60-year-old woman named Mrs. Chen, who spoke with a thick accent and squinted at Natasha like she was trying to determine if this girl could actually pay rent, handed her 2 keys. Rent due, first of every month. No exceptions. No pets. No noise after 10 p.m. You break something, you fix it. I understand. You ever live alone before? No. Mrs. Chen made a sound that might have been sympathy or judgment. Good luck, Natasha Morris. Natasha Morris. The name felt strange in her mouth. She had practiced saying it, signing it, inhabiting it. But standing in this apartment with 2 keys and 3 suitcases that contained everything she was allowed to bring from her old life, the name felt like a costume she wasn't sure she knew how to wear. The first week was brutal. Natasha learned that grocery shopping required planning and budgeting and comparing prices. She learned that the subway at rush hour was a physical contact sport. She learned that doing laundry in a shared basement facility meant guarding your clothes like they might be stolen. She learned that the sounds of the city, sirens and shouting and garbage trucks at 5 a.m., were very different from the quiet of a 300-acre estate. She ate ramen for 4 days straight because she didn't know how to cook anything else and couldn't afford to eat out. She cried twice. Once in the shower where no one could hear her. Once on the fire escape at 2 in the morning when she wondered if she had made a catastrophic mistake. But she didn't call her mother. She didn't ask to come home. She had asked for this freedom, and freedom, she was learning, came with a cost. The job posting had been simple. After-school program coordinator needed. Work with children ages 6 to 14. Provide educational enrichment and emotional support. Modest salary. Huge impact. Natasha had applied with her new name, her new background, her new identity as someone with a degree in art education and absolutely no family connections. The interview was conducted by a woman named Sharon Davis, who ran the nonprofit out of a converted community center in the Bronx. Sharon was 45, exhausted, passionate, and deeply suspicious of anyone who wanted to work with underserved kids without understanding what that actually meant. Why do you want this job? Sharon's question was direct, almost aggressive. Because I want to matter. Natasha's answer surprised even herself with its honesty. I want to do something that makes a difference beyond how it looks on paper. Sharon studied her for a long moment. This isn't glamorous work. These kids have trauma, poverty, instability. They will test you. They will hurt you. They will make you question if you're making any difference at all. I understand. Do you? Because you look like someone who's never had to struggle for anything in your life. The words stung precisely because they were true, or had been true until 3 weeks ago. Maybe that's why I need to be here, Natasha said quietly, to learn what struggle actually means. Something shifted in Sharon's expression. You start Monday. Don't be late. These kids don't give second chances to people who waste their time. The community center was a 40-minute subway ride from Natasha's apartment. The building had been a warehouse once, converted into a space with uneven floors, flickering lights, and walls covered in peeling paint and children's artwork. 23 kids showed up that first afternoon, ages ranging from 6 to 14, skin tones spanning every shade of brown and beige, languages including English, Spanish, Mandarin, and Arabic, family situations ranging from stable working class to foster care to homelessness. They looked at Natasha like she was an alien who had landed in their world without permission. This is Miss Morris, Sharon introduced her. She's going to be running the art program. A girl of about 12, rail-thin with cornrows and eyes that had seen too much, raised her hand. Why should we care about art? It ain't gonna get us jobs. The other kids murmured agreement. Natasha knelt down to the girl's eye level. What's your name? Keisha. Art isn't about jobs, Keisha. Art is about learning to see, learning to express what's inside you when words aren't enough, learning that your perspective matters, that your voice matters, that the way you see the world is worth sharing. Keisha's eyes narrowed with suspicion. That sounds fake. Maybe. Natasha smiled. But try it anyway. Pick up a brush and show me something real. For a moment, Keisha just stared at her. Then, slowly, she reached for the paint supplies Natasha had set out on the table. What she painted, angry reds and desperate blues swirling into shapes that somehow captured chaos and hope at the same time, made Natasha's throat tighten with emotion. This is extraordinary, Natasha whispered. Keisha shrugged, but there was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Something that looked like pride. Over the following months, Natasha learned more from those 23 kids than she had learned in 4 years of private school education. They taught her about resilience, about finding joy in the smallest victories, about the difference between pity and respect. A boy named Marcus, 10 years old, told her about his mother who worked 3 jobs and still couldn't afford their rent. I'm gonna make money when I grow up, he said with absolute conviction, so she don't have to work so hard. A girl named Yesenia showed her drawings of the home in Honduras she barely remembered, tears streaming down her face as she tried to capture the colors of flowers she hadn't seen in 6 years. A teenager named Dante wrote poetry that was so raw and honest that Natasha had to step outside to compose herself after reading it. These children had nothing, and yet they showed up every day with a hunger to create, to be seen, to matter. And for the first time in her life, Natasha felt like she was doing something that actually mattered beyond boardrooms and balance sheets. In her tiny apartment, surrounded by art supplies she bought with her modest salary, Natasha painted more honestly than she ever had before. No one was watching. No one was judging. No one was calculating the market value of her work. She painted the faces of her students, the subway at rush hour, the view from her fire escape, the particular loneliness of being anonymous in a city of 8 million people. She painted freedom, and it was beautiful, but the loneliness was harder than she had expected. There were nights when she missed her mother's wisdom, her brother's terrible jokes, even her father's lectures about responsibility and legacy. There were moments when she wondered if this experiment was worth the isolation. And then she would wake up the next morning and realize that nobody knew who she was. Nobody was trying to use her. Nobody was calculating her value based on her bloodline. That freedom, she decided, was worth any amount of loneliness. She had been living as Natasha Morris for exactly 2 years and 4 months when she walked into a coffee shop in Brooklyn and changed her life forever. The place was called Groundwork, a small corner shop with mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and a smell of fresh coffee that made the whole space feel like a warm hug. Natasha came here 3 mornings a week before work to sketch in her notebook and drink coffee that was good enough to justify the $4 price tag. She was deep in concentration, sketching the barista as he worked the espresso machine, when a voice interrupted her focus. "That's incredible." Natasha looked up to find a man standing beside her table. Tall, dark-haired, sharp features that photographers would describe as classically handsome, maybe 30 years old, dressed in a suit that was expensive but slightly rumpled, like he had thrown it on without caring about the impression it made. "Excuse me. You're drawing." He gestured to her sketchbook. "I've been watching you work for the past 20 minutes, and the focus, the intensity, it's captivating. You've been watching me for 20 minutes. Natasha felt a flutter of unease. "That's a little creepy." The man laughed, and the sound was genuinely warm. "You're absolutely right. That sounded creepy. Let me start over." He extended his hand. "I'm Cameron Drake, and I promise I'm not a stalker. I'm just someone who recognizes real talent when I see it." Natasha hesitated, then shook his hand. "Natasha Morris, would you mind if I sat down for a minute? I'll buy you a coffee as an apology for the creepy watching." Every instinct told her to say no. She had spent 2 years carefully avoiding entanglements that might complicate her anonymous life. Romance meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant potential exposure. But there was something about Cameron Drake's smile that made her want to say yes. "1 coffee." He sat down across from her and ordered 2 lattes without looking at the menu. His attention never left her face. "So, Natasha Morris, tell me about yourself." "There's not much to tell. I work with kids. I teach art at an after-school program. I live in a tiny apartment with questionable plumbing." Cameron's eyebrows rose. "A starving artist in New York. How perfectly cliché," says the man in the expensive suit who watches strangers in coffee shops. He laughed again. "Touché. Okay. Fair point. I run a tech company. Very boring. Very corporate. Nothing like what you do." "What do I do?" "You create." He gestured to her sketchbook. "You capture something real and translate it onto paper. I just move money around and pretend it matters." "That's a very cynical view of your own work." "I'm a very cynical person." Cameron leaned forward slightly. "Or, I was until about 20 minutes ago." "What changed 20 minutes ago?" "I saw someone who was completely absorbed in what they were doing. No performance, no pretense. Just pure focus on something that mattered to them." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" Natasha found herself smiling despite her caution. "I don't know anything about your world." "Good. Keep it that way." "My world is exhausting." They talked for 2 hours. Cameron asked questions about her work with the kids, her art, her life in the city. He listened like her answers actually mattered, like he was genuinely interested in understanding who she was. He told her about his company, a platform that connected freelance workers with clients in real time. He had started it 3 years ago with nothing but an idea and a laptop. Now it was starting to attract serious investor attention. "I didn't have advantages," he said. "No family money, no connections. Everything I've built came from my own hands, my own work, my own refusal to quit when everyone said I would fail." The irony was almost painful. Here was a man who thought they came from similar circumstances, who believed they were both self-made, who had no idea she had walked away for more money than he could imagine. She should have told him. She knew she should. But every time she tried, fear stopped the words in her throat. If he knew she was a web, everything would change. He would look at her differently. He would wonder if she had been testing him. He would question every conversation they had ever had. So she stayed silent and told herself she would reveal the truth later, after they were solid, after their connection was secure enough to survive the revelation. When they finally parted, Cameron insisted on getting her phone number. I know this is forward, but I haven't had a conversation this real in years. Please let me see you again. Natasha hesitated. Then she heard herself say yes. He called her the next day, and the day after that, and every day for the following week until they finally had dinner together. Natasha chose a tiny Italian restaurant in her neighborhood. No white tablecloths, no wine lists that read like novels. Just good food, reasonable prices, and the kind of atmosphere that couldn't be manufactured. Cameron arrived in jeans and a sweater that somehow made him look more attractive than the expensive suits. He ate his pasta with genuine pleasure and asked for seconds of the bread basket. This is perfect, he told her. Absolutely perfect. Most people would want somewhere fancier. Most people are idiots. Cameron reached across the table and took her hand. Natasha, I've spent my whole life surrounded by people who care more about appearances than reality. Fancy restaurants with terrible food but impressive decor. Parties where everyone is performing instead of connecting. Relationships built on what we can do for each other instead of what we feel. That sounds exhausting. It is. But you're different. You're real. You're not trying to be anything other than yourself. And I find that incredibly attractive. Natasha felt her carefully constructed defenses beginning to crumble. He seemed so sincere. So different from the Gregory Ashfords of her old world who only saw her last name. You don't even know me, she said softly. Then let me learn. What followed was 6 months of the most intense relationship Natasha had ever experienced. Cameron pursued her with a passion that took her breath away. He showed up at the community center with flowers. He attended the kids' art show and praised their work with genuine interest. He spent hours in her tiny apartment watching her paint, asking questions about her process, treating her creativity like something sacred. He shared his own vulnerabilities. The father who had told him he would never amount to anything. The early failures that had almost broken him. The determination to prove everyone wrong that drove him to work 18-hour days. I didn't have your advantages, Natasha. He told her one night as they lay together in her narrow bed. No family money. No safety net. Everything I have, I built from nothing. The irony was a knife twisting in her chest, but she still didn't tell him the truth. I'm falling in love with you, Cameron said 4 months after they met. Natasha's heart raced. I'm falling in love with you too. I want to marry you. The words hung in the air between them like a promise and a question and a fork in the road that would determine the rest of her life. Cameron, we've only known each other 4 months. I don't care. He sat up, his eyes intense. I have never felt this way about anyone. I have never met someone who makes me want to be better, to build something real, to create a life that matters beyond profit margins and investor presentations. Say yes, Natasha. Build a life with me. She should have told him then. She should have said, before you propose, there's something you need to know about who I really am. Instead, she said yes. They married at City Hall 6 weeks later. Natasha wore a simple white dress she bought at a vintage shop for $75. Cameron wore the one suit he owned that wasn't designed for boardrooms. No guests, no photographers, no family on either side. Just a judge, 2 witnesses pulled from the hallway, and 2 people making promises they both believed they would keep forever. I love you, Natasha Morris. Cameron's voice was steady as he slipped the ring onto her finger. I love you, Cameron Drake. And in that moment, surrounded by strangers in a government building, Natasha believed she had found what she had been searching for. Real love, authentic connection, a man who loved her for her essence, not her inheritance. She had never been happier, or more naive. The first year of marriage was everything Natasha had hoped for. They moved into a modest apartment together, combining their lives and their furniture and their dreams. Money was tight. Cameron's company was growing but not yet profitable, so they budgeted carefully, cooked at home, found free entertainment in the city. Natasha continued teaching at the community center. Cameron continued building his platform. They supported each other through setbacks and celebrated each other's victories. I love coming home to you, Cameron would say, wrapping his arms around her after another 16-hour day at the office. You're the only thing in my life that makes sense. Natasha believed him. She painted constantly during that first year, channeling her happiness onto canvas in colors that seemed to glow from within. Cameron hung every piece on their walls. "My wife is a genius," he would tell anyone who visited. "A real artist. Not like the pretentious gallery types. She creates from the soul." Natasha would blush and deflect, but secretly she treasured every word. Here was a man who loved her for her essence. Here was proof that real love existed outside the golden cage of the web name. The shift began so gradually that Natasha barely noticed it at first. It started with the investors. Cameron's platform had finally attracted serious venture capital, and suddenly their modest apartment was hosting dinner parties with men in suits worth more than their monthly rent. Women with jewelry that caught the light and made Natasha's simple pieces look like costume accessories. Natasha did her best to be a good hostess. She cooked. She smiled. She tried to participate in conversations about market valuations and user acquisition strategies, but she felt increasingly out of place. Like she was watching a performance she didn't understand and hadn't been given the script for. The morning after one particularly awkward dinner party, Cameron made his first request. "Maybe don't talk so much about your students next time." His tone was gentle, almost apologetic. "The investors don't really relate to that kind of thing." Natasha looked up from her coffee. "What should I talk about?" "I don't know. Just try to fit in more. Talk about things they're interested in." It was such a small request. So reasonable on the surface. These were important dinners. She should make an effort. But it was the first time Cameron had ever asked her to be something other than herself. The requests kept coming, each one small and reasonable, and slowly adding up to a larger message. "Maybe don't wear the paint-stained jeans when we have company. Could you do something different with your hair? Something more polished? I've hired an image consultant, just to help you feel more comfortable at these events." Each adjustment was presented as being for her benefit, to help her feel confident, to make her more comfortable. But the underlying message was clear. The woman Cameron had fallen in love with was no longer good enough. By the end of their second year of marriage, Cameron's company had become a genuine success. The modest apartment became a penthouse with views of the city. The dinner parties became galas. The image consultant became a permanent fixture in Natasha's calendar, scheduling her for spa treatments and shopping trips and etiquette coaching. "You're representing the Drake brand now," Cameron explained when she protested. "People are watching us. We need to present the right image." "What's wrong with my image?" "Nothing's wrong. I just want to help you feel more confident in these situations." But Natasha didn't feel more confident. She felt like she was disappearing. Cameron started attending events without her. Important dinners where she wouldn't fit in. Industry parties where her presence might be awkward. Charity galas where he needed to focus on networking rather than, and this was his exact word, babysitting his wife. "You don't really enjoy these things anyway," he would say. "Wouldn't you rather stay home and paint?" She would rather have been by his side. But she had learned that expressing that preference led to arguments she could never win. Cameron's mother made her opinions clear from the beginning. Patricia Drake was a woman who had spent her entire life clawing her way into society's margins and believed that proximity to power was the same thing as having it. The first Sunday dinner at Patricia's home was an exercise in subtle cruelty. "I'm sure you're a lovely girl." Patricia's smile was sharp as broken glass. But Cameron could have married anyone. There are families who have been positioning their daughters for years, and he chose someone with no background whatsoever. "I love your son, Mrs. Drake." "Love." Patricia's laugh was dismissive. "Love doesn't run empires, dear. Love doesn't produce heirs with the right connections. Love doesn't open the doors that Cameron needs opened." Natasha looked at Cameron, waiting for him to defend her. He said nothing. That night, Natasha tried to talk to him about his mother's comments. "She's just old-fashioned." Cameron dismissed the concern without looking up from his laptop. "Don't take it personally." She basically said, "I'm not good enough for you." She said, "You're not from the right background." "That's different." "Is it? Because it sounds like the same thing." Cameron sighed with the exaggerated patience of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. "Natasha, I married you. Isn't that proof enough that I think you're good enough?" But his actions told a different story. The art supplies Natasha had carefully collected were slowly replaced with approved decor. Her paintings, once proudly displayed, were removed to make room for pieces selected by an interior designer. Her teaching job was gently discouraged until she finally quit, leaving her isolated from the children who had given her purpose. "You have everything you could want here," Cameron reasoned. "Why exhaust yourself with that commute?" "Because it matters to me. I matter more." And that was the argument Natasha could never win. Because saying that her work mattered more than her husband would make her the villain. And Cameron was very skilled at making himself the victim. By their 3rd year of marriage, Natasha had become a ghost in her own life. She moved through the penthouse like a shadow. She smiled at events she was occasionally permitted to attend. She made small talk with people who looked through her like she was transparent. She went to bed alone most nights while Cameron worked late or attended functions where her presence wasn't required. The woman who had once painted with passion and taught with purpose now spent her days in empty rooms, wondering where she had gone. She still painted sometimes, in secret, hiding her canvases in a storage closet Cameron never entered. The paintings were dark now, shadows and silences, the particular loneliness of being invisible to someone who was supposed to see you. One night, Natasha gathered the courage to confront him. "Cameron, we need to talk." He looked up from his phone with obvious irritation. "Can it wait? I have calls to make." "No, it can't wait." Natasha's voice trembled, but held. "I feel like I'm disappearing, like you don't see me anymore, like everything about me that you used to love has become something you're embarrassed by." Cameron set down his phone with exaggerated patience. "Natasha, I'm building an empire. I'm under enormous pressure. I'm sorry if I haven't been as attentive as you'd like, but I'm doing this for us." "Are you?" "Because it feels like you're doing it for yourself, and I'm just supposed to be grateful for the privilege of watching. That's unfair." "Is it? When was the last time you asked about my art? When was the last time you came home and actually talked to me instead of treating me like part of the furniture? When was the last time you made me feel like your wife instead of your liability?" Cameron's expression shifted. The patient mask slipped, revealing something colder underneath. "I married you when you had nothing." His voice was quiet, controlled, dangerous. "I gave you this life, this penthouse, these clothes. Everything you have is because of me. I had a life before you. Did you? Because from what I remember, you were teaching in a crumbling building and living in an apartment with questionable plumbing. That's not a life, Natasha. That's survival." Natasha felt like she had been slapped. That apartment was mine. That job was mine. I chose that life because I wanted to create something real. Real. Cameron's laugh was nothing like the warm sound she had fallen in love with. "Reality is expensive, Natasha. Reality is power and connections and the ability to shape the world. What you had wasn't real. It was a fantasy. I was happy. You were naive. There's a difference." That night, Natasha lay awake staring at the ceiling of a penthouse that didn't feel like home. She thought about calling her mother. One phone call and everything would change. Victoria would send cars, lawyers, the full protection of the web name. But that would mean admitting the experiment had failed, that she had given up her identity to find real love, and instead had found a man who loved a version of her that no longer existed. Pride kept her silent. Fear kept her frozen. And the slow erosion of her self-worth continued. 3 months before the dinner that would change everything, Natasha found the first text message. She hadn't meant to snoop. Cameron had left his phone on the bathroom counter while he showered, and it buzzed with an incoming message that appeared on the locked screen. "Can't wait for this farce to be over. Soon, my love." 5th. Natasha's heart stopped. She stared at the words until the screen went dark, then stared at the blank screen until her vision blurred. V. Vanessa. Vanessa Hartwell, daughter of the Hartwell Industries CEO. The woman who seemed to appear at every event Cameron attended. The woman whose eyes followed him across rooms. The woman Cameron always found time to chat with while Natasha stood alone in corners. When Cameron emerged from the shower, Natasha confronted him. "Who is V?" His face gave nothing away. "What are you talking about?" "The text on your phone. Can't wait for this farce to be over." "Who sent that?" "You went through my phone." It was on the counter. The message popped up. "Don't change the subject." "Who is V?" Cameron wrapped a towel around his waist with deliberate calm. "You're being paranoid. Am the first. Business contacts don't sign texts with my love." "Natasha." His voice turned cold. "You need to stop this. This jealousy, this insecurity. It's not attractive. I'm not being jealous. I'm asking a reasonable question. You're accusing me of something based on a text message you misread on a screen you shouldn't have been looking at. That's not reasonable. That's crazy. I'm not crazy. Aren't you?" Cameron stepped closer, and suddenly his physical presence felt threatening in a way it never had before. "You live in a penthouse you didn't pay for. You wear clothes I bought you. You haven't worked in a year. And you're standing here accusing me of infidelity because of a text message. Do you understand how that sounds?" Natasha stepped back. "I'm asking you to tell me the truth. The truth is that you're paranoid and ungrateful. The truth is that I've given you everything, and you're looking for reasons to be unhappy. The truth is that if you keep pushing this, you might not like what you find." He walked past her into the bedroom, leaving her standing in the steam from his shower, trembling. She didn't ask again. She should have left that night. Packed a bag, called her mother, admitted defeat, and started over. But she didn't. She stayed because leaving felt like failure. Because she had invested so much of herself in this marriage that walking away felt like losing everything. Because she still believed, stupidly, desperately, that the man she had married was somewhere inside the cold stranger he had become. So she stayed, and she smiled, and she pretended everything was fine, until the night of the dinner. The invitation came 3 weeks in advance. Cameron handed it to her over breakfast, his expression unreadable. "You need to attend this one." Natasha looked at the embossed card. An intimate dinner at their penthouse. 40 guests. Investors, board members, key partners. "I thought you preferred to attend these things alone. This one is different." Cameron's smile didn't reach his eyes. "This one, I need you to be seen." Something about his tone made her uneasy, but she nodded, as she had learned to nod to everything, and began the process of preparing for an event that would destroy her life. The image consultant selected her dress. Cream-colored, elegant, unremarkable. The message was clear. Be present. Don't stand out. Her hair was styled into a sophisticated updo. Her makeup applied with professional precision. Her jewelry chosen to be tasteful rather than statement-making. When she looked in the mirror the night of the dinner, she barely recognized herself. The artist who had once worn paint-stained jeans with pride had been replaced by a polished mannequin who existed only to complete Cameron Drake's image. "You look fine," Cameron said when she emerged from the dressing room. His attention was on his phone. "We need to leave in 10 minutes. Fine. Not beautiful. Not stunning. Not even good. Just fine." They didn't have to travel. The dinner was being hosted in their own penthouse. But Cameron's words felt like a dismissal anyway. The guests began arriving at 7. Natasha greeted them with a smile she had perfected over 3 years. Investors whose names she had memorized. Board members whose egos she had learned to manage. Society figures who looked at her like she was a curiosity they couldn't quite understand. And Vanessa Hartwell, arriving in a crimson dress that looked like it had been designed for this specific moment. "Natasha, how lovely to see you." Vanessa's smile was pure poison. "You look, well, comfortable." "Thank you, Vanessa." The dinner table was set for 40. Crystal and china that had been selected by someone other than Natasha. Floral arrangements that filled the room with a scent that was too sweet, almost cloying. Natasha was seated at one end of the table, Cameron at the other, like opposing forces that were no longer meant to connect. The first course was served. Conversations flowed around her. Business deals, market trends, the kind of talk that Natasha had been trained to smile through without contributing. She caught Cameron's eye once across the table. He looked right through her. That was when she knew something terrible was coming. The main course was cleared. Champagne was poured. And Cameron stood, tapping his glass with a knife to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" The room fell silent. 40 faces turned toward him, with the expectant attention people give to someone they believe controls their futures. Tonight we celebrate not just the success of Drake Technologies, but the beginning of an exciting new chapter. Polite applause rippled through the room. "As many of you know, I've always believed in evolution." Cameron's voice was smooth, practiced. "In shedding what no longer serves us to embrace what elevates us." Natasha felt her pulse quicken. Something in his tone sent alarm signals racing through her nervous system, which is why I have an important announcement to make. And then he asked the question that would shatter her world. "Natasha, why don't you tell everyone what you did before we met?" 40 pairs of eyes turned toward her like synchronized dancers following choreography they had practiced. Natasha's champagne glass trembled in her hand. She looked at her husband and saw triumph in his smile. "I worked in community outreach." Cameron's laugh cut through the silence like shattering crystal. And the performance began. Community outreach. Cameron's laugh was sharp and performative, designed to signal to everyone in the room that they were supposed to find this amusing. That's a generous way to describe handing out flyers at a non-profit nobody's ever heard of. A nervous titter rippled through the crowd. Someone actually laughed. "My wife has a talent for making poverty sound noble." Cameron's voice grew stronger, feeding off the attention. "She was sweet when I met her. Simple, uncomplicated. And at the time, that's what I needed." The word simple hung in the air like an indictment. Natasha sat frozen in her chair. Her hands had gone cold. The champagne glass in her grip was trembling so violently. She had to set it down on the table before it shattered. She looked around at 40 faces. Some showed pity, some showed curiosity, some showed the particular pleasure people take in witnessing someone else's humiliation. Not one of them looked away. Not one of them spoke up. But as I've grown, as this company has grown, I've realized something crucial. Cameron paused, letting the silence build. Success requires a partner who matches your ambition. Someone who understands the language of power. Someone who can stand beside me, not behind me. He extended his hand toward the middle of the table. Vanessa Hartwell rose from her seat like an actress who had been waiting for her cue. The crimson dress caught the light. The smile on her face was pure triumph. Vanessa has agreed to stand beside me. Cameron's voice swelled with pride as his mistress took her place next to him, not just in business, but in life. The gasps came immediately. Whispers exploded across the table. Heads swiveled between Cameron, Vanessa, and Natasha. Cameron reached into his jacket and produced a leather folder. I've filed for divorce. And tonight, in front of all of you, I'm asking Natasha to sign these papers. He walked around the table with measured, deliberate steps. Each footfall echoed in the suddenly silent room. To let us both move forward into the lives we're meant to live. Cameron placed the documents directly in front of Natasha. The leather folder landed on the table with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. Sign them. His voice was gentle now, almost kind, which somehow made it worse. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Enough money to go back to whatever simple life you came from. Natasha stared at the folder, at the man she had loved for 4 years, at the woman in crimson who was already claiming her throne, at 40 witnesses who had just watched her husband systematically destroy her and had chosen to be complicit through their silence. Something inside her, something that had been compressed and diminished and nearly extinguished over 3 years of careful erasure, suddenly ignited. She looked up at Cameron. Do you have a pen? His smile widened. Victory confirmed. Of course. He produced an expensive fountain pen from his pocket and handed it to her like he was granting her a favor. Natasha opened the folder. The divorce papers inside were flagged with colored tabs indicating where she should sign. He had prepared this, planned this, orchestrated this entire evening as a public execution. She didn't read a single word. She didn't negotiate. She didn't beg or cry or make a scene. She simply signed her name on every flagged line. Her handwriting was steady, clear, final. When she finished, she closed the folder and handed it back to Cameron. Then she stood, smoothed her cream-colored dress, and looked her husband in the eyes. I hope you find what you're looking for, Cameron. Her voice was quiet, but absolutely steady. I genuinely hope you do. She turned and walked toward the door. The crowd parted before her like water. The whispers followed her. 40 pairs of eyes burned into her back. She'd almost reached the elevator when she heard Cameron's voice behind her. Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to new beginnings. The sound of clinking glasses followed her into the hallway. Natasha stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed, and only then, in the privacy of that small descending box, did she allow herself to breathe. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing, but underneath the shock and humiliation, something else was rising. Rage. Clean, clarifying, righteous rage. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Natasha stepped out into the marble-floored entrance of the building where she had lived for 2 years and suddenly felt like a stranger. The night air hit her face as she pushed through the glass doors onto the street. Cold, sharp, real. She stood on the sidewalk, her designer dress and professional hair and perfect makeup completely at odds with the fact that she had just been publicly discarded like trash. 4 years of hiding who she was. 4 years of trying to be loved for herself. 4 years of marriage to a man who had systematically erased her until nothing remained. And it had all ended in a performance designed to humiliate her in front of 40 witnesses. Natasha pulled her phone from her small clutch purse. Her hands were still shaking as she scrolled through contacts she hadn't accessed in 4 years. She found the name, stared at it, felt 4 years of stubborn pride warring with the desperate need to go home. The need won. She pressed the call button. The phone rang once. Natasha. Her mother's voice was immediate, alert, as if she had been waiting by the phone for exactly this call. Mom. The word came out broken. I need to come home. We're already on our way. 45 minutes earlier, in a study in the Connecticut estate, Victoria Webb had been sitting at her desk reviewing quarterly reports when her phone buzzed with an alert. She picked it up and saw a notification from Marcus Reeves, the private investigator she had kept on retainer for the past 4 years. the man whose sole job had been to watch her daughter from a distance and report anything concerning. The message was brief. You need to see this. Now. Victoria opened the attached video file. The feed was from a discreet camera that Marcus had positioned with a view into Cameron Drake's penthouse. Victoria had approved the surveillance 2 years ago when her investigator had first reported concerns about how Natasha's husband was treating her. What she saw made her blood turn to ice. Her daughter, sitting at a table surrounded by 40 people, being systematically humiliated by the man who had promised to love her. Victoria watched Cameron's performance, the cruel jokes, the public dismissal, the mistress in the crimson dress, the divorce papers placed in front of her daughter like an ultimatum. She watched Natasha sign them with a dignity that made Victoria's heart break and swell with pride simultaneously. And then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to her sons, Jackson, Elliot. I need you both at the house in 20 minutes. We're bringing your sister home. The second was to her head of security. Prepare 7 vehicles. Full security detail. Legal team. We're going into Manhattan tonight. The third was to Marcus Reeves. Send me the address. We'll be there within the hour. Jackson and Elliot arrived at the estate within 15 minutes. Both had been at their own homes. Both had dropped everything the moment their mother called. What happened? Jackson's voice was tight with controlled fury. Victoria showed them the video. Elliot's face went white. I'm going to kill him. No. Victoria's voice was absolute. You're going to do exactly what I tell you to do. We're going to collect your sister. We're going to protect her. And we're going to remind Cameron Drake exactly who he just destroyed. She looked at both her sons. Are we clear? They nodded. The convoy assembled in the circular drive of the estate. 7 black SUVs, armored and bulletproof. A security team that had been trained by former Secret Service agents. A legal team led by Margaret Richardson, the most feared divorce attorney on the eastern seaboard. And the Webb family, mobilizing like an army going to war. Victoria sat in the lead vehicle, her phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated logistics. Jackson sat beside her, his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping. Elliot was in the second vehicle, already on his laptop, accessing Drake Technologies' digital infrastructure and looking for vulnerabilities. ETA 42 minutes, the driver announced. Victoria nodded. Then she called her daughter. The convoy moved through the Connecticut countryside toward Manhattan like a force of nature. 7 vehicles traveling in perfect formation, headlights cutting through the darkness. Inside the lead SUV, Victoria ended the call with Natasha and immediately dialed Margaret Richardson. I'm sending you a video file. I want divorce papers drawn up within the hour. Grounds for fault based on adultery, emotional abuse, and fraud. Fraud. Margaret's voice was crisp, professional. He made her sign papers under duress in a public setting without legal representation. That document is worthless, but we're going to make sure he knows exactly how expensive his mistake was. Understood. I'll have everything ready by the time we arrive. The convoy entered Manhattan at 8:43 p.m. The streets were still busy with Friday night traffic, but the vehicles moved with purpose, their presence commanding attention from everyone they passed. They pulled up to Cameron Drake's building at 8:56. The doorman, a young man in his 20s who had been hired to make residents feel important, stepped forward with his professional smile. It died the moment Victoria Webb stepped out of the vehicle. He knew that face. Everyone who followed business news knew that face. Mrs. Webb. His voice actually trembled. How can I help you? I'm here to see my daughter. Behind Victoria, 6 more vehicles disgorged their passengers. Jackson and Elliot, 6 lawyers, carrying briefcases. 12 security personnel moving with military precision. The doorman's eyes went wide. I'll need to call up to Mr. Drake's residence. No, you won't. Victoria's voice was ice. You'll provide us with access immediately, or you'll find yourself unemployed before midnight. The doorman looked at the small army assembled in his lobby. He made the smart choice. Penthouse level. Elevator on the right. The elevator ride was silent. Victoria stood in the center, her sons flanking her, the legal team behind them, security forming a protective perimeter. We go in quietly, Victoria said. We collect Natasha. We deliver the legal consequences. And we leave. No theatrics. No violence. We are better than him. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer. The sounds of celebration drifted from the dining room. Laughter, clinking glasses, the casual cruelty of people who believed they had witnessed a victory. Victoria walked through the foyer into the dining room like a queen entering enemy territory. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. Glasses froze halfway to mouths. Every head turned toward the doorway, and Cameron Drake's face drained of all color. "Good evening." Victoria's voice carried across the silent room with perfect clarity. "I'm Victoria Webb, and I'm here to collect my daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Cameron's mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "Natasha." His voice cracked. "What is this?" Victoria didn't spare him a glance. Her eyes found her daughter standing near the elevator in the hallway, and the expression on her face softened with something that looked like tenderness and fury combined. Natasha stepped forward into the room. But she wasn't the diminished woman who had signed papers 10 minutes ago. She stood differently now, shoulders back, head high, like she was remembering something she had forgotten. Behind Victoria, Jackson and Elliot entered the room, both tall, both carrying themselves with the particular confidence of men who had never needed to prove their power because it was simply understood. Several people at the table gasped in recognition. "Is that Jackson Webb?" someone whispered. "And Elliot. Oh my God." Vanessa Hartwell had gone pale beside Cameron. She took a small step backward, distancing herself from him as if proximity might be contagious. Cameron found his voice. "Mrs. Webb, there's been a misunderstanding. Her name is Natasha Webb." Victoria's correction was sharp as a blade. "And the only misunderstanding is yours, Mr. Drake." Margaret Richardson stepped forward, her presence somehow filling more space than her physical form occupied. She handed Cameron a folder. "Mr. Drake, inside you'll find documentation that the divorce papers you had Mrs. Webb sign tonight are null and void. They were signed under duress, in a coercive environment, without legal representation present." Cameron opened the folder with shaking hands. "You'll also find evidence of your extramarital affair with Miss Hartwell." Margaret's voice was professionally neutral but carried an undercurrent of satisfaction, including photographs, correspondence, hotel receipts, and testimony from 3 witnesses. More than sufficient grounds for Mrs. Webb to file for an at-fault divorce. "This is insane." Cameron's voice rose. "You can't just burst in here and make accusations." "We're not making accusations." Jackson's voice was granite. "We're presenting facts. There's a difference," Elliot added, almost conversationally. "You should also know that Webb Digital owns 42% of the cloud infrastructure your platform runs on. As of 1 hour ago, we initiated a comprehensive review of our terms of service agreement with Drake Technologies." The words hit Cameron like a physical blow. Without access to that infrastructure, his entire company would collapse within days. "You can't do that." His protest sounded desperate even to his own ears. "Actually, we can." Elliot's smile was cold. "Breach of moral conduct clauses. They're buried in Section 17 of your service agreement. I'm sure you read the fine print when you signed." Cameron hadn't. Nobody ever read Section 17. Victoria turned to address the 40 guests who had been frozen in their seats, watching this unfold like spectators at a car crash. "I'm sure many of you are recalculating your professional relationships right now." Her voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly how power worked. "Let me make this simple. Any investor, partner, or associate who remains financially connected to Mr. Drake after tonight will find themselves unable to access web media platforms for future ventures." The threat was delivered with perfect politeness, which somehow made it more terrifying. The exodus began immediately, chairs scraping back, napkins being dropped on plates, investors suddenly remembering urgent appointments. "I'm so sorry, Cameron. I just remembered I have an early morning meeting. This has been lovely, but I really must go. Thank you for dinner." Within 3 minutes, 35 of the 40 guests had gathered their belongings and fled toward the elevator. The remaining 5 were clearly calculating whether their loyalty to Cameron was worth becoming toxic in Victoria Webb's eyes. They chose survival. Within another minute, the room was empty except for Cameron, Vanessa, Natasha, the Webb family, and the legal team. Vanessa grabbed her clutch purse and headed for the door without a word to Cameron. Her heels clicked rapidly across the marble floor. The elevator doors closed behind her. And then there were 2. Cameron stood alone in his dining room, surrounded by the remains of his celebration dinner, facing the family of the woman he had just discarded. "You're Victoria Webb." His voice was barely a whisper. "The Victoria Webb I am. And Natasha is. She's your daughter." "She is." Cameron's face cycled through shock, recognition, horror, and the dawning understanding of exactly how catastrophically he had miscalculated. He turned to Natasha. "You lied to me. For 4 years you lied." Natasha stepped forward. Her voice was steady now, strong, carrying the authority of 4 generations of power she had tried so hard to escape. "I omitted. There's a difference. And can you honestly blame me?" Cameron opened his mouth, closed it, You just spent 10 minutes publicly degrading me for being poor, for being unsophisticated, for not having the breeding required to stand beside you. Natasha's voice grew stronger with each word. What would you have done if you'd known the truth from the beginning? I would have, Cameron started. You would have married me for my money. Natasha cut him off. You would have used my family's connections to build your empire. And you still would have resented me eventually because that's who you are, Cameron. Someone who can't love anything he can't control. That's not true, isn't it? You spent 3 years trying to erase me, telling me I wasn't sophisticated enough, polished enough, connected enough. You isolated me from my work. You dismissed my art. You made me feel invisible in my own life. Natasha paused. And the tragedy is that even if I had told you who I was on day one, you still wouldn't have truly seen me. You would have just used me differently. Natasha. Cameron's voice broke. Please. I gave you 4 years of my life. I loved you with everything I had. I tried to be the woman you needed. Natasha's eyes were dry. No tears. Just clarity. And you thanked me by humiliating me in front of 40 witnesses, by treating me like something disposable, by making me sign divorce papers like I was a problem you needed to solve efficiently. If I had known who you were, if you had known, you would have treated me like a possession instead of a project. Either way, you never saw me, Cameron. You only ever saw what I could do for you. Victoria stepped forward and placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. We're leaving now. Her voice allowed no argument. Mr. Drake, you'll be hearing from our attorneys. I suggest you retain competent legal counsel. You're going to need it. She guided Natasha toward the elevator. Jackson and Elliot followed, forming a protective wall between their sister and the man who had hurt her. At the elevator, Natasha paused. She turned back to look at Cameron one final time. I hope you find what you're looking for. Her voice held genuine compassion. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just a kind of sad understanding. But I suspect it doesn't exist. Because you've been looking for worth in money and status and power, when the only thing that ever really mattered was whether you could love someone without conditions. The elevator doors closed, and Natasha Webb left her old life behind. The ride down to the lobby was silent. Natasha stood between her mother and brothers, feeling their presence like a protective barrier between her and everything that had just happened. When the doors opened onto the lobby, she stepped out into a space that suddenly felt like the threshold between her past and her future. The 7 vehicles were waiting outside, engines running, ready to carry her home. Are you all right? Jackson's voice was gruff with barely controlled emotion. I will be. Natasha looked at her brother. I think I will be. I wanted to kill him. Elliot's hands were clenched into fists. When Mom showed us what he did to you, I wanted to fly there and end him. Violence wouldn't have helped. Natasha leaned into her brother's protective fury even as she rejected the impulse. This was better. He'll have to live with knowing exactly what he lost. Victoria guided her daughter toward the lead vehicle. Into the car, darling. We're going home. Natasha climbed into the SUV and sank into the leather seat. The door closed. The convoy began to move. And through the tinted windows, she watched Cameron Drake's building grow smaller in the distance until it disappeared completely. Inside the vehicle, Victoria took her daughter's hand. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. Natasha shook her head. You gave me exactly what I asked for. The freedom to discover who I was. The space to make my own mistakes. She paused. I just wish I had figured it out sooner. You figured it out exactly when you needed to. Victoria squeezed her daughter's hand. And now we begin the work of helping you remember who you really are. The convoy drove through the city streets, leaving Manhattan behind, heading north toward Connecticut and the estate where Natasha had been born. Toward home. By morning, the story had exploded across every news platform. Tech CEO publicly humiliates wife at dinner party, discovers she's billionaire media heiress. The video had leaked. Someone at the dinner had recorded Cameron's speech and sold it to gossip sites. By 6 a.m., it had 17 million views. The business press picked it up by 8. Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Forbes, all running variations of the same story. Cameron Drake's catastrophic miscalculation, the tech darling, who had publicly discarded his wife, only to discover she was worth 50 times his entire company. The investors who had fled the penthouse began pulling their money by 9 a.m. Conference calls were happening across the city as boards and partners distanced themselves from the radioactive fallout. The Hartwell family issued a statement by 10. Hartwell Industries severs all business relationships with Drake Technologies effective immediately. We do not associate with individuals whose character falls below our standards. The irony of that statement, given that their daughter had been the mistress, was apparently lost on them. By noon, Drake Technologies' valuation had dropped by 60%. By end of business Friday, Cameron Drake had lost everything it had taken him 5 years to build. And through it all, Natasha Webb remained silent. She gave no interviews. She made no public statements. She didn't participate in the media frenzy or add fuel to the fire consuming her ex-husband's life. She simply went home. The Connecticut estate looked exactly as she remembered it. The long driveway lined with oak trees, the mansion rising from manicured grounds like something from another era, the ocean visible beyond the gardens, endless and unchanging. Staff lined the entrance when the convoy arrived. Margaret, the head housekeeper who had known Natasha since childhood. Thomas, the butler who had taught her to ride a bicycle on these very grounds. Elena, the cook who had made her favorite meals for 23 years. "Welcome home, Miss Natasha." Thomas's voice was thick with emotion. "It's good to have you back." Natasha hugged him, something she would never have done before she left. "Thank you, Thomas. It's good to be home." Inside, the house enveloped her like an embrace. Everything was familiar. The grand staircase, the portrait gallery, the library where she had spent countless hours as a child. Victoria guided her upstairs to her old bedroom. "It's exactly as you left it. I gave instructions that nothing was to be changed." Natasha opened the door and felt tears prick her eyes for the first time that night. Her room was a time capsule. Her paintings still on the walls. Her books still on the shelves. Her art supplies still organized in the corner where she had left them 4 years ago. And on her desk, a framed photograph of her father. Marcus Webb had died 2 years ago, a heart attack that took him without warning. Natasha had learned about it from a newspaper because she had deliberately avoided all contact with her family to maintain her experiment in ordinary life. The guilt of that choice washed over her now. "He knew where you were." Victoria appeared at her shoulder. "He always knew, and he was proud of you, Natasha. Proud of your courage, even when it meant we missed you terribly. I should have come home when he died. He understood why you didn't." Victoria's voice was gentle. "He wouldn't have wanted you to sacrifice your journey for his sake. That's who he was." Natasha picked up the photograph. "I never got to say goodbye." "Then say it now. Say whatever you need to say. He'll hear you." Natasha held the photograph and let herself grieve for the first time in 2 years. For the father she had lost. For the marriage that had destroyed her. For the woman she had been trying so desperately to become. Victoria held her daughter while she cried. No advice. No platitudes. Just presence. When the tears finally stopped, Natasha felt emptied and somehow lighter. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you heal." Victoria helped her daughter to the bed. "Now you remember who you are. Now you let us help you put the pieces back together. And Cameron Drake will face the natural consequences of his choices. His investors are gone. His partnership collapsed. His reputation is destroyed." Victoria's voice was matter-of-fact. "Within 6 months, Drake Technologies will be worth a fraction of its current value. He did this to himself, Natasha. We simply allowed the truth to be seen." Natasha nodded slowly. "I don't want revenge. I just want to be free of him. Then that's what we'll focus on. Freedom, healing, becoming." The days that followed were a careful process of reconstruction. Victoria assembled a team of therapists specializing in recovery from emotional abuse. Dr. Simone Reeves became a regular presence in Natasha's life, helping her identify the patterns of manipulation Cameron had used. "It was abuse," Dr. Reeves said during their 3rd session. "I know that word feels strong, but what you experienced fits every clinical definition." "It didn't feel like abuse while it was happening," Natasha admitted. "It just felt like I was failing. That's how emotional abuse works. It makes you believe you're the problem." Dr. Reeves leaned forward. "It keeps you focused on fixing yourself instead of recognizing that the relationship itself is broken." Natasha absorbed this slowly, the understanding that she hadn't failed, that Cameron's treatment of her had been a reflection of his character, not her worth. Her brothers visited constantly. Jackson brought her favorite coffee from the city. Elliot spent hours just sitting with her, not talking, just being present. "I'm sorry we didn't know," Jackson said one afternoon. "If we had known what he was doing to you, I didn't want you to know." Natasha cut him off gently. "I was too proud to admit I had failed." "You didn't fail." Elliot's voice was firm. "You loved someone who wasn't capable of loving you back. That's not failure. That's courage." The legal divorce proceedings began within the week. Margaret Richardson was ruthless and precise. The settlement she negotiated made headlines not because Natasha needed the money, but because it sent a clear message. You cannot humiliate a woman and walk away unscathed. Cameron sent letters, long, rambling apologies that tried to explain and justify and somehow make his choices her fault. Natasha read the first one. Then she instructed her lawyers to handle the rest. She had no interest in his regret. She was too busy rebuilding her life. The art came back slowly at first. Natasha couldn't even enter her old studio for the first month. The thought of painting triggered memories of Cameron's dismissive comments, his subtle suggestions that her creativity was a hobby rather than a calling. But one morning, about 6 weeks after coming home, she woke before dawn with the overwhelming urge to create. She went to her studio in her pajamas and pulled out canvases that had been waiting for her, paints that had dried but could be reconstituted, brushes that remembered the shape of her hand. The first brushstroke was hesitant. The second was bolder. By the time the sun rose, she was lost in the work, her hands moving with a certainty she had forgotten she possessed. What emerged was dark and powerful, a figure dissolving into shadows while simultaneously reforming into light, death and rebirth captured on a single canvas. Natasha stepped back and looked at what she had created, and for the first time in 4 years she saw herself clearly. She wasn't broken. She was transforming. 6 months after the dinner that destroyed her marriage, Natasha received official notification that the divorce was final. She felt nothing. No sadness. No relief. Just a quiet acknowledgement that a chapter of her life had closed. That same week, she received an invitation that would change everything. My friends, before we see how Natasha's story ends, I need you to pause with me for just a moment. Because what we've just witnessed isn't just a story about wealth or revenge or even justice. This is about something deeper, something that might be happening in your own life right now. Natasha made a choice that so many of us make. She hid her true value to see if someone would love her essence instead of her assets, and what she discovered broke her heart. But it also saved her life. Here's the lesson, beloved. A person who cannot love you at your lowest will only use you at your highest. Cameron Drake couldn't appreciate Natasha when he thought she was just a non-profit worker. He saw her as beneath him, as someone to be improved and corrected and ultimately erased. And the heartbreaking truth is that even if she had revealed her identity on day one, he still wouldn't have truly seen her. He would have just used her differently. Real love, authentic soul-deep love, doesn't need a resume. It doesn't need a bank statement. It doesn't require you to shrink or hide or apologize for taking up space in the world. The right person will love your heart before they ever know your worth. And here's what I need you to understand. If you're in a relationship right now where you feel invisible, where you're constantly told you're not enough, where you're shrinking yourself to fit into someone else's vision, that is not love. That is control. That is erasure. And you deserve so much more. I see you. The person watching this who has been made to feel small. The person who has been told their dreams don't matter. The person who has been slowly disappearing in a relationship that should have helped them grow. Your worth is not determined by how someone treats you. Your value is not up for negotiation, and the fact that someone couldn't see what you're worth says everything about their limitations and nothing about your light. Let me pray for you right now, wherever you are. Father, I lift up every person hearing these words who has ever felt unseen, unvalued, or erased by someone who claimed to love them. I pray that you would remind them of their immeasurable worth, not because of what they have or what they can provide, but because of who they are, fearfully and wonderfully made, precious beyond measure, worthy of love that celebrates rather than diminishes. I pray for supernatural courage to walk away from relationships that dim their light, for divine discernment to recognize love that honors them, for healing from every word that made them question their value, for restoration of every dream that was dismissed as unimportant. Surround them with people who see them truly, protect them from those who would use them, and bring into their lives a love so genuine, so honoring, so life-giving, that they finally understand what they were always meant to experience. In Jesus' name, amen. Now let's see how Natasha's story ends. Because restoration is always more beautiful than revenge. 18 months after signing those divorce papers, Natasha stood in a Manhattan gallery surrounded by her artwork. The exhibition was called Invisible No More. 23 paintings that chronicled her journey from silence to voice, from erasure to emergence, from invisibility to undeniable presence. The early pieces were dark, shadows consuming a figure until she was almost unrecognizable, the suffocation of disappearing in plain sight. The middle pieces showed chaos, colors clashing, forms dissolving and reforming, the destruction that comes before transformation, and the final pieces were luminous, a woman standing in light, fully herself, no longer hiding or shrinking or apologizing for taking up space. Critics who didn't know her backstory were moved by the universal truth in her work. The Washington Post called it devastatingly honest. Art Forum praised her emotional courage. Collectors were already inquiring about purchases before the exhibition even opened. But Natasha hadn't created these paintings for critical acclaim or commercial success. She had created them to close a chapter, to transform her pain into something that might help someone else feel less alone. The gallery was packed for opening night. Art enthusiasts, journalists, society figures who wanted to see if the famous web heiress lived up to the hype. Victoria stood near the entrance, watching her daughter move through the crowd with a grace that came from finally inhabiting her own skin. "She's extraordinary," a voice said beside Victoria. Victoria turned to find an older woman, perhaps 70, with kind eyes, and a presence that suggested she had seen enough of life to know what mattered. "She is," Victoria agreed. "I'm Dr. Helena Vasquez. I run a foundation that provides art therapy to survivors of domestic violence and emotional abuse." The woman extended her hand. "Your daughter's work speaks to something we desperately need. Would she be open to a collaboration?" Victoria smiled. "Ask her yourself. She's right over there." On the far side of the gallery, Natasha stood before her self-portrait, the final piece in the collection. A woman standing in light, arms outstretched, fully visible. "Your work is extraordinary," a voice said beside her. Natasha turned to find a man about her age, maybe 30, with warm eyes and an easy smile. He was dressed casually, jeans and a blazer, holding a glass of wine and looking at her painting with genuine appreciation. "Thank you." Natasha studied his face, trying to place him. "Do we know each other?" "I don't think so." The man extended his hand. "I'm Owen Matthews. I run a foundation that brings art education to underserved communities. And your work, it speaks to something real. Something most gallery art is too polished to touch." Natasha shook his hand. "What do you mean? This one especially." He gestured to the self-portrait. "It's about standing on the edge of something new, being terrified and exhilarated at the same time, being alone but not lonely." Natasha felt her breath catch. "That's exactly what I was trying to capture. Then, you succeeded." Owen met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that felt like recognition, like meeting someone who spoke the same language. "Would you be interested in coffee sometime? I'd love to discuss a potential partnership between your foundation and mine." It was a professional request, framed as business, but there was something underneath the words that felt like more. Natasha considered the invitation. The cautious part of her, the part that had been so badly burned, wanted to decline, to protect herself, to stay safe in the fortress she had built. But another part of her, the part that was slowly learning to trust again, recognized something genuine in this stranger's eyes. "I'd like that. Coffee sounds perfect." They exchanged information. Owen lingered for a few more minutes, discussing his foundation's work with obvious passion. He talked about children who had never been told their creativity mattered, about the transformative power of artistic expression, about his belief that art could change lives if given the chance. Natasha found herself leaning closer, genuinely engaged, genuinely interested. When he finally left to let her return to her other guests, she stood alone with her paintings and felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. Hope. The coffee meeting became lunch. Lunch became dinner. Dinner became weeks of careful getting-to-know-you conversations that gradually transformed into something deeper. Owen was nothing like Cameron. Where Cameron had been charming in a calculated way, Owen was genuine, without trying. Where Cameron had asked questions to find angles for manipulation, Owen asked because he truly wanted to understand. Where Cameron had made her feel like she needed to shrink, Owen created space for her to expand. He met her family gradually. Jackson's protective interrogation, Elliot's subtle warnings, Victoria's careful observation. "I like him," Victoria said after Owen left from a family dinner where he had held his own in discussions about media policy and artistic integrity. "He's not interested in your fortune. He's interested in you." "How can you tell?" "Because he disagreed with you about abstract expressionism for 20 minutes and never once backed down just because you're a web." Victoria smiled. Only a man secure in himself can argue with a billionaire and not apologize for it. The relationship progressed slowly. Natasha needed it to be slow. She was still healing, still learning to trust, still figuring out how to be in a relationship without losing herself. Owen understood. He never pushed. He never demanded. He simply showed up, consistently and reliably, proving through actions rather than words that he was safe. Their first kiss happened 4 months after they met, walking through Central Park after a gallery opening. Stars overhead, the city glittering around them. "I've been wanting to do that for a while," Owen admitted afterward. his forehead resting against hers. Why didn't you? Because you needed time. And you're worth waiting for. Natasha felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever made her feel like her healing was a priority rather than an inconvenience. I'm falling in love with you, she whispered. It terrifies me. I'm falling in love with you too. Owen pulled back to look into her eyes. And we can be terrified together. 1 year after her exhibition, Natasha received a phone call she had been half expecting and half dreading. Cameron wanted to see her. Her first instinct was to refuse, to delete the message and pretend it had never come, to protect herself from whatever pain he might still be capable of inflicting. But Dr. Reeves suggested otherwise. Closure can be healing, but only if you're strong enough to maintain your boundaries. Are you? Natasha thought about the woman she had been a year ago, standing in that penthouse signing divorce papers, and she thought about the woman she had become, the artist, the philanthropist, the woman learning to love again with open eyes. I think I am. The meeting took place at a quiet cafe in Brooklyn, the same neighborhood where Natasha had lived as Natasha Morris, the same streets where she had discovered who she was when no one knew her name. Cameron arrived first. Natasha saw him through the window as she approached, and she almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, diminished. The confident CEO who had commanded 40 people's attention was gone, replaced by a man who had lost everything he thought mattered. Natasha. He stood when she entered. Thank you for coming. She sat across from him, noting the changes. The weight loss, the gray in his hair, the haunted look in his eyes. You wanted to talk, so talk. Cameron was silent for a long moment, gathering words. I've lost everything. The company, the investors, the reputation. Vanessa left months ago. My mother isn't speaking to me. I have nothing. Natasha waited. And the worst part, Cameron continued, his voice breaking. The worst part is that I realize now I had everything when I had you. I had a wife who loved me for who I was, not what I could provide. I had a partner who believed in me when no one else did. I had something real, and I destroyed it because I was too blind to see its value. He looked up at her with eyes that begged for something she couldn't give. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. I'm not asking for another chance. I know I burned that bridge beyond repair. I just needed you to know that I understand now. I understand what I lost. I understand what I did to you. And I'm sorry. Genuinely, devastatingly sorry. Natasha studied the man she had once loved. The man who had made her believe she wasn't enough. The man who had tried to erase her and nearly succeeded. I believe you're sorry, she said finally. And maybe someday I'll be able to forgive you. But not today. Today I'm just grateful that I got out. That I found my way back to myself. That I didn't let what you did to me define the rest of my life. Cameron nodded, accepting the boundary. You deserve every happiness, he said quietly. The man you're with now, Owen. He's lucky to have you. I hope he knows that. He does. Natasha stood, preparing to leave. Goodbye, Cameron. I hope you find peace. But you'll have to find it without me. She walked out of the cafe without looking back. The past was behind her. The future was waiting. And for the first time since that terrible night at the dinner party, Natasha Webb felt completely free. 2 years after they met, Owen proposed. Not with a public performance. Not with calculated drama. Just the two of them in her studio, surrounded by her paintings, covered in paint from an afternoon of creating together. I love you, Owen said simply. I love your heart and your courage and the way you see the world. I love that you trust me with your wounds and your dreams. I want to spend my life creating beautiful things with you. Will you marry me? Natasha looked at this man who had waited for her, who had given her space to heal, who had loved her without conditions or calculations. Yes, the wedding happened in the gardens of the Connecticut estate. Small, intimate. Just the people who truly mattered. Victoria cried, though she would deny it later. Jackson and Elliot stood as proud as if they were giving away their own daughter. And in the front row, an empty chair with a photograph of Marcus Webb, who had always believed his daughter would find her way home. Natasha wore a dress she had designed herself. Not cream and forgettable, ivory and bold, with hand-painted details that told the story of her journey. Owen waited at the altar with tears in his eyes. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Your bias. Absolutely. And completely right. The vows they exchanged were honest and imperfect. Promises to grow together, to support each other.